questions we're going to pose, but first we just want to have sort of a group discussion about that video and how anyone thinks that it relates to them or to their community here. And then we're going to do a short presentation about us, just so you have a better idea, and then we're going to break into small groups. But just to start, does anyone have anything they want to respond to that video?
How they felt, maybe how that video made you feel, or
how did that make you?
Yeah, any kind of thoughts or ideas. I know for me, that video when I first saw it really kind of scared me, and it kind of, I don't know, just shocked me in a way that I'd never really felt before. So
I felt a different emotion when I first saw it. I saw that and then saw the doom and gloom part of it. Was like, it just made me angry, and then you know, the hopeful message at the end was just like, why aren't we doing anything? And then, like, I don't know, I just really wanted to do something. It just made me want to act. So how did you guys think about that?
I think that the point about the tipping point was a different perspective than what I've heard lots and lots of things before, but that was a very good illustration that at some point you can't recover no matter what you do. So that made me think differently.
Definitely puts it into perspective. And explaining it in such a cohesive and like simple way, just talking about positive feedback. The illustrations really make it hit home.
Well, I'm really hungry, and I'm eating, and I'm watching this, and I'm thinking, oh no, and then I'm thinking, how are we going to eat? What are we going to? How are our eating patterns going to have to change? And
so does anybody have any ideas about how our eating patterns might have to change in order for to alleviate carbon dioxide emissions and avoid that kind of scenario?
Stop eating meat. They talked about methane. I had no idea that it had 20 times the effect on the atmosphere that carbon does.
That's definitely got to be one factor. Does anybody else?
Frozen foods. Foods that require a lot of energy. You know, I've tried to just get rid of any kind of frozen foods, even ice cream. Especially on a hot day, it's hard to resist, but I suppose homemade fresh ice cream locally sourced is okay, but you know, to get something from the freezer section that's been in a freezer, whether it's been in shipping or, you know, sitting there in a grocery store for a couple of weeks with freezer, that requires a lot of energy.
I think just agricultural land is a big important thing. I mean, not necessarily going to be sustainable forever to be shipping all our food in from Iowa. And in the meantime, some of the best agricultural land locally also happens to be pretty, and people are putting houses on it. But it's okay because they have their vegetable gardens. And, you know, vegetable gardens for yourself, that's good. It makes an impact and it's helpful. But in the long term, we're not going to be able to feed cities off of local little backyard patches. So protecting agriculture at a reasonable scale near where people live is important. And beyond, you know, people love to get back to nature and back into the woods, but in the end, you know, those resources are going to be needed, you know, to be able to feed us.
I just finished graduate school, and some of what we did was climate modeling, and we know that what's currently agricultural land isn't necessarily going to be agricultural land in the future. So to go off that comment, what we can do with our modeling is figure out what impacts are likely. We're already able to do that to some extent. And therefore, how does land use need to change to accommodate climate change?
It's going to require a lot of infrastructural changes for the whole world.
There are going to be places where it just doesn't make sense to have a city anymore because it's surrounded by desert or something like that, you know. There's going to be changes. And the refugees, they just talked about that. There's going to be huge movements of people. It's happened in history before.
Oh, really? So they
yeah, well, our group, we've been working at the organic farm, and basically they just say, like, buy local products, because all the other stuff is, like, shipped on, like, trucks and planes and ships, and that's, like, giving off, like, CO2 and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's really good.
So, getting back to the movie, was there anything that you guys, like, didn't like, or any other thoughts? Yeah.
I'm not terribly convinced by fear factor.
Yeah.
Like, because you could have the opposite argument with statements, and there's no way for us to know whether or not they're really true. In the general public, like, well, am I really going to believe this? Like, which one am I going to believe? And it's really hard for them to make a decision. And why would they sacrifice, or in their mind, sacrifice so much for something they're not even so sure about? So, you know, in my view, being able to make a convincing argument based on something that they can connect with, I mean, I think is important. Especially in my job. I mean, everything we do is bottoms up. If the people don't want it, there's nothing we can do. So people need to really understand.
I think that's where a lot of the issues are. It's so hard to connect with so many different people because so many people are concerned about different things that it's such a multifaceted issue that you can't really concentrate on one thing. It's so diverse, and what is the problem? Yes, Bill?
Well, we've seen a lot of really very interesting and helpful, informative films here at the Green Living series, and they're usually presented in a way where they interview a broad array of scientists and specialists and people who are considered to be authorities in certain topics, and for somebody like me, that's all very believable. And then I've shown films like the one that you just showed to small groups of people, and they have just bought it instantly, like, okay, what can we do? And so I can see, and I'm always amazed that they don't want more backup, more background information before they are willing to join the fight. But I think, you know, intuitively for definitely those of us here, this is all very believable. And for other people, I think a broad array of tools to distribute the message, to disseminate the word, is helpful. So that kind of a animated film might be good for one type of person, and then the more scientifically based stuff would be good for somebody like Krista. And so, you know, I do think we have to really sort of use all the tools, all the skills. You know, there's people in Washington who do just fabulously concise and communicative animation. I can't remember the name, but there's some really good work in that arena going on, and I think we have to use it all.
Yeah. And all of us need to. I mean, I talk about my research to Joe on the street, my neighbor, and his name actually is Joe, actually. And he doesn't have the background. He's not necessarily a flaming liberal like a lot of us in this room. And, you know, has heard some NPR, has heard some Rush Limbaugh, doesn't necessarily know what to think. And I say, look, this is what we're doing in school. And I try to explain it at... Well, grad school's full of jargon. There's a lot of terminology that you use to get the hat with the tassel. But that's not necessarily the best way to explain things. And we need to go beyond a persuasive film like this, I think, because facts are important to people, in many cases, who want to evaluate the evidence they're seeing. And people want to learn how to do that. Our science education isn't great in this country. It hasn't been for the last at least 20 or 30 years. And people are struggling with trying to understand what actually is going on. They don't have a framework with which to decide whether or not climate change is occurring. They just know that, you know, this guy votes the way they do, so maybe they'll listen to him, or at least that's a perception I have. And so, you know, if we can actually get out there on the street and do some explaining ourselves, that does seem to make inroads with your neighbors, with your friends.
Yeah, that's why I like this one, because it's not too scientific, and a lot of people can understand it just because it's pretty simple language, and the images really bring that to it.
But a lot of people will have questions after watching something like this, and then you need to be able to provide the science to back it up.
I think it's hard when you see something like this online. You know, we're doing it in a venue right now, but if you just see it online, it seems just as credible as something that might come from the other side and be funded by, you know, whatever sources. It might not be credible, so it's the same sort of thing where you have to be careful where you use it.
Like 98% of scientists, like respected scientists, believe in climate change. Something like that.
Well, there's 98% of literature on climate change.
Yeah, like you'd think that would be enough. Like, what?
Well,
Really?
it depends. Also, it depends who has the money. You know,
Right.
it really is it's a very much of a money game, and I think that's where people become very discouraged because they don't feel as if they have any power, being small and little and whatever, and they don't see. They can't imagine what a future would look like not the way it is.
it's very difficult for people to go, wait a minute, does this mean I have to give up this and that and this and that, and what is going to take that place? And how will it be, sometimes they have to see that it's not just a sacrifice, it's a better way of life. That's a very difficult thing to communicate, because people will see something like that, and it keeps them charged for, you know, a year, half a year, and they get tired. They get very, very tired. And they don't, and other people around them are not doing the same thing. It's difficult. I think some of the best changes are those that, like you just said, person to person. When somebody sees someone else do it and they look like the same guy on your street, that sometimes can make a bigger impact than a large media campaign or whatever.
But we also need to stay motivated enough to get into institutions too. We need to grow up and get into institutions that can help support a grassroots change, even if the plutocrats stealing all the money aren't so interested in doing that.
I teach 5th grade, and so part of the reason why I'm here is to gather lots of information to supplement whatever I might have already known. And I just would like to share with you what has happened in the past few years. Depending on who my administrative people are, depending on who the parents that I have of the students, I've been told that I need to be very careful about presenting global warming because it's too scary and we don't want to scare the 10-year-olds. And I've also been told that if I present global warming, I need to present the other side as well. And I'm not quite sure what the other side is. I have had parents send me lots of non-believable stuff like the cows are the cause of global warming and all that kind of stuff, and I just, wow, I can't teach that. So but I do think that educating the kids who then become young people like you needs to happen, and then they go home and talk to their parents about it.
Absolutely. I learned about the greenhouse effect in 2nd grade, and I never forgot it. I became a climate scientist.
Yeah.
Teach them young.
So, but I mean, connecting to what this gentleman said here about making it local and making it real, I think is what, matters. Like I share the experience where I grew up. We used to catch blowfish, and we don't catch, there's no blowfish there anymore. How come? So I try to get them to look locally, and then it's not quite as scary, but it's real, and they try to figure out, well, what happened to make this change? But I have parents and other teachers that I work with that say, oh, it's just a cycle. I'm not sure I really believe in global warming. And wow, I don't know. Like you said, 98% of the scientists, what is going to make them believe? I don't know.
I think one of the biggest challenges we've got is the vested interest that this film touched on, where the money is, are by and large opposing public belief in this, that this is even a problem.
All for short-term economic growth.
Yeah. And I think that's the biggest challenge we've got in this country and maybe globally, is that the people that run the financial systems of the world are not willing to buy into the fact that there is a problem.
And therefore neither is the government.
Right.
Yeah, because it would ruin what they're trying to achieve.
Well, on the topic of
Yes.
teaching, I teach at a college, and my heart really goes out to you. When they're that young, you really want to help them see things in a healthy light. But in spite of the effort of some parents and some administrations to keep the truth from the children, the people at the architectural school where I teach are your ages, and there are probably 8 out of 10 of them tell me the reason why they came to architecture school is because they want to save the world. They want to make the world a better place. And they are extremely passionate and engaged in learning about the process of sustainable design techniques and urban planning techniques that are healthier for us and for our planet. And it seems like it's a part of the ideology of that secondary education. So somehow they get there anyway. But then you go another step further, and now they're graduated and they're out practicing in the world like I am, and my clients are these people that you speak of, and they don't care at all about whether or not they have other options for their plumbing or for their heating and air conditioning, or I can't even sometimes get them to use LED lighting because they heard it's too expensive. And it just makes so much sense. It has a slightly longer payback period. It's 5 years instead of 3 years for fluorescent, which have mercury in them. So it's that's one of the reasons why I came today. I wanted to hear how other people keep themselves in the space where we have this healthy attitude about moving forward in terms of helping people become informed and helping people make good decisions, while we're surrounded by these people who pay me and make it possible for my family to live where it lives. There's just such a difference between the two attitudes. I feel like I'm getting out of balance somehow.
If I can just pick up on two of the threads that a few people have spoken to, the personal, making it personal, and the systemic. I think we do suffer from the fact that we are causing long-term effects which aren't felt from one day to the next in this part of the world. And so finding ways to connect it to people's personal lives, be it pulling together the natural disasters which do occur more frequently in this country, and particularly in other parts of the world, and somehow cash those out in terms of the price we pay, I think may be a strategy. But somehow we need to personally feel uncomfortable about the status quo and not disconnected from it as some vague future concern. Perhaps a part of that is telling the story more dramatically about effects being suffered in other parts of the world, especially the global south, where I've traveled a bit, and the effects of drought and deforestation, which ripple through life, agriculture and quality of life and cost of food and everything else are very dramatic, and far more so than we're experiencing here in the temperate zones. And then on the structural point, I'm glad it was raised. Don't have a lot to add, but did want to just mention that tomorrow night here at Red River will be a film called Priceless, which connects to money in politics and the funding of campaigns through private special interest contributions, and particularly focusing on the energy issue and agriculture. And I think we do need to, an important site in this struggle is to deal with that corrupt relationship between those economic forces seeking quarterly gains at the cost of the environment and their ability to dominate government policies. We have a majority in the House of Representatives that denies the scientific facts of global warming, and that's a huge impediment to progress.
I don't know if I missed what is it that your group does, and how did your program evolve?
Well, what are the ones mentioned right here?
I mean, I know you guys go around, and, I mean, I could try to sum it up, but what is it exactly?
Yeah, so we're called Climate Summer. We're one of 6 teams traveling all over New England this summer. We're the New Hampshire team, and over the course of the summer, we'll be in 7 different towns for a week each, and we're working within those towns with local groups, with local governments, with local individuals and organizations to work towards a fossil fuel world. So that means fossil fuel free world. No more burning fossil fuels. Yeah. So we're just trying to support these efforts as well as to connect them throughout the state and throughout the region. And do you want to remember?
Yeah, and so at the end of the summer when we're biking around, I don't know if Brenda mentioned that, but at the end of the summer when all teams bike back to the Boston area, we're going to collaborate and create something called the State of the Movement Report, which is going to document everything that we've seen throughout New England with regards to a sustainable movement and an environmental movement. And then that report will be available to the public. It'll be on our website, newenglandclimatesummer.org, and we'll be distributing it to all the community members, which is Jonathan, Gregory, who'll get a copy, and people in Concord will be able to take a look at it. And it's just so that communities can know what's going on and across the region and in their own towns. And yeah, it's big end goal of our program is to just kind of help spur on the environmental movement.
Are you in New Hampshire, or are you from somewhere else?
We're from all over.
We're from all over. Ben's our UNH representative, but the rest of us,
University of New Hampshire.
the rest of us have no connection to New Hampshire, except it's really pretty and we like it.
But yeah, so we want that. The State of the Movement's really just to integrate what everyone's doing, because there's so many people that are working towards the same goal that we want to connect everybody. There's people in Portsmouth that didn't know about things that were down the street that were going on. that we try to just connect with these people, so it makes a stronger movement, really, if more people are connected, working for the same thing.
We should move on
Yeah.
so we have a good hour for the World Cafe part of this. But
yeah, a lot of the presentation is actually
The science.
discussed in the video, and I'm sure you guys are all really aware of what's going on. So how much do we really need to present of it?
We'll go through some of this pretty quickly just to jumpstart your brains and remind everyone of a few simple facts that I'm sure many of you have heard before. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about how we need to talk more about the science and justify everything that we kind of say when it comes to global warming. So as the video said, we're inevitably going to rise 0.5 degrees Celsius more from where we are, and we've already increased 0.8 degrees. And inaction will lead to a much greater rise and that big ball of fire consuming the earth. But we're not there yet. No doom and gloom. So yeah, climate has always changed. We've had cycles, but this rate of change is unprecedented. Yeah, so effects on the natural world, we got loss of species, variety, loss of biodiversity with the change in temperature mainly, and we have ocean acidification, which I don't know if any of you guys have seen photos. I don't have any right now, but with the pHs of the ocean changing, you get coral reefs bleaching, which I don't know if any of you have seen them, but while it may seem kind of cool to see a large group of coral turn white, it's actually kind of scary. And other effects include receding glaciers, like this. This is 1920 where the glacier is. This is 2005. There's basically no ice on it. Just another example.
There's all sorts of health implications that we already know about. I'm sure we're all here because we're all agreeing, but some of them that we've seen. In the World Health Organization, they found that 24,000 people a year in America die due to the particulates that are breathed in by burning of fossil fuels, coal and oil plants and stuff. And all this is caused by the water pollution, the bad, poor air quality, and there's so much carcinogens in the air and stuff. And
I have a question. How do they get that information? I'm just being like if I said that to someone, they would be like,
we have actually a list of cited sources at the end of it, so for this, it's the organization that's providing a citation, but when we get to the very, very end, rather than...
I think she's asking how the World Health Organization...
Yeah, how does the World Health Organization determine that someone died from particulate matter in the air?
I think it's by taking in consideration where they live in relation to the power plant, and this is, I think, a very low estimate based on their specific cause of death and their location to the power plant and sort of how those ratios coincide. But I think that this is also a very low estimate because, to be credible, they can't. There's a lot they can't assume.
Another connection to the health too. If you know about the Bow coal power plant, and I think I got this estimate from the Sierra Club that they pump about 200 pounds of mercury into the air on a yearly basis. And although that's not exactly connected to climate change, it's still like a health impact of fossil fuels that's connected to burning. So
there's a slide actually a little bit later on that talks about the social injustice of how many more people are dying just because of the proximity to coal burning plants and stuff. But more health related. Anyways, doom and gloom. Several hundred millions of climate refugees by 2050 due to the fact that coastal areas are flooding. There'll be limited food and water for people to survive off of. And it's something that we've already talked about with agriculture and stuff. There's so many implications that are negative. We've already seen the heat waves in Russia. 15,000 people died last year, and just things like that are really really amazing to me.
And just for if people, I don't know if everyone's familiar with sort of what happened in Russia, but because of the heat wave and because there was a lot of fire going on, people either sort of had the choice of opening their windows and being very severely affected by the smoke that was coming through their windows, or keep their windows closed. And because it's an area where historically they've never suffered such heat, they didn't have air conditioning and really weren't equipped for this sort of weather. So a lot of people either had the choice of dying from heat or dying from smoke, which was many people think is a very clear connection to global warming due to the change in weather in the monsoon.
interestingly enough, national security also is quite related to climate change and energy security. The Pentagon, they've been doing a lot of work looking into renewable energies because they recognize the risk that relying on the Middle East for oil entails. So they've been doing a lot of research into becoming more energy independent, and they're actually also preparing for, they're putting together reports like preparing the military for climate change, and so that's kind of an indication that you know when the military, U.S. military is really taking something seriously, that it's something that everybody should be paying attention to, yeah?
It's not academic for them. Their convoys, their refueling convoys kept getting blown up
Yeah.
because they were such, you know, a red bullseye target.
Right.
1 in 24 fuel convoys led to a casualty.
Yeah, so, you know, if they have solar
That's 7.
operated cars or something, like Humvees, you know.
Yeah. They're also, though, they're preparing for, like, the changing world that climate change is going to bring. So if they're preparing for that, everybody else should be preparing for it because it's the U.S. military. That's a big deal. But
They also go to war. Why should we
yeah.
Point to the computer.
keep clicking?
No. There we go.
There we go.
Oh, so there are a lot of economic risks associated with it. As the video and a lot of you'll probably know, there's a lot of short-term. A lot of people believe there's like short-term disadvantages to acting in any way towards climate change. But as some of the things we have here, the long-term impacts of climate change are going to take a huge burden on the economy. Food prices, also water prices, the cost of cleanups for natural disasters that will increase, and also the health impacts will put a huge strain on health systems all over the world as disease increases.
Okay, so justice is also a very big issue in the environmental realm. If you kind of notice, a lot of times places where there are pollutants spewing out into the air aren't exactly the rich places where the upper class white people are living, or even middle class. It's places where people can't fight the putting in of like coal plants and other things, and they also might not have the time or even like the knowledge that these things are going on. And so a lot of times places with lower income or non-white people are affected more severely. And as you can see, asthma is more prevalent in African Americans and sends them to the hospital at a much higher rate than non-Hispanic whites, and they die twice as often, which, like, we hear of people who have asthma all the time, and you don't think of them dying from it, but it does happen. And after the BP oil spill, toxic waste was disproportionately dumped in low-income African American communities in Louisiana and Florida, and it's just something that we have to be aware of as people who might not be affected by these things. And obviously no one wants it by them, but it has to go somewhere.
Climate justice is also sort of the more long-term effect of environmental justice. This is less on a national scale and more on a global scale in terms of what countries are actually contributing to pollution versus what countries are actually seeing the consequences of climate change. So the definition will be the people who are suffering the negative effects of the burning of fossil fuels are the ones who are least responsible. So this is often nations that are going to be flooded or that are going to see severe negative impacts in terms of agriculture and the way that they live, and that's contributing to the problem of refugees.
So I guess this is kind of just posing a question that I think we're going to transition into the World Cafe after this, but it's kind of the idea that we need to take care of our future generations by taking care of the climate and the earth now rather than waiting for the real impacts of climate change to start materializing, because we aren't going to, by the time they hit us, it's going to be too late, so we need to start acting now.
Especially as, you know, the United States, we're one of the wealthiest nations in the world. It's definitely our responsibility to start with this. You know, it's not just ours, but, you know, all the other first world countries, if you will. No, that doesn't really make sense.
So now we're going to transition into the World Cafe discussion. So the way that this works is that you're going to be divided. You can sort of go throughout the room and get in small groups, maybe of about.
Should we count off?
Yes.
Yeah, let's count off.
How many
Alright,
people do we have?
I think we're 19.
So,
3 groups.
5, count on group of 5.
Right,
Can you
yeah.
join me?
Do you want to start off? I don't know if I start.
One.
One.
Five.
Oh, 5.
1,
I didn't hear.
2.
3.
4, 5, 1, 2.
5.
1.
2.
Are we doing still 2?
Are
We'll just
you-
rotate.